Hello, my name is Malik Abazdab. Welcome to PM Express. Give President John Mahama 4 more years and he will come back and ask for more time, arguing that he has just laid a solid foundation for the takeoff of the economy. That is according to the vice presidential candidate of the opposition New Patriotic Party, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia. In his view, Ghana's problem are not resources, but the management of the resources. He believes that the John Mahama government has mismanaged Ghana's economy in many ways than anyone could do. When we come back from the break, I will introduce 2 guests who will have answers to all the issues that we will raise, asking questions whether there was credibility to the questions raised by Dr. Bawumia at a lecture earlier today. You're watching PM Express, stay tuned. Yeah, welcome back. We are discussing the lecture delivered by Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, who took the economic record of the NDC government, particularly the record of President John Mahama, and attacked it in the most vicious and violent manner. My guest in the studio to discuss all of the issues raised by Dr. Bawumia at his lecture. In fact, a campaign launch disguised as a lecture. Mr. Kweku Kwate. He's a member of parliament for Obuasi East. Right?
West.
Obuasi West. And then my own colleague, George Weafi, who is a critical member of the Joy Business. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Let me start with you, Honorable. Why didn't you just call this a campaign launch? Why did you disguise this as a lecture?
Well, I don't know what you call a campaign launch and a lecture. All that we sought to do today, which I think Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia did splendidly, was to make the case that this government has gotten so much and has delivered so little and has been telling us year after year that we are laying the foundation and that foundation never gets laid properly so that we can grow. Now we are being told that as for this last one, President Mama says, oh, as for this one, we mean it. Vote for us again.
He hasn't quite said that.
But the point I'm making is that when he says, I'll put money in your pocket in 2017, after laying the foundation year after year since 2009 by the NDC administration, then we're making the case that it is time to change policy. We will be happy if this government would change policy and stop the mismanagement and the corruption. The corruption, if I can conclude on this, and we will be happy if this government would stop the mismanagement and cut the corruption. But if they don't, the case we made today is that another government would do far better and would give Ghanaians a better deal. If you call that campaign, well, that's...
Did you bus supporters to this event? Because there was such euphoria and such loud noises and cheers and claps.
No, we didn't have to. Dr. Bawumia has made his mark. And there are always people who want to listen to him. And it was not just the National Theatre that was filled with people. As you move around Accra, and I'm sure it will be the same across the country, people were tuning into radio. And you could feel that, yes, there was something happening in this country. And that thing was that Dr. Bawumia was telling Ghanaians the NPP's perspective of how the economy is and the better deal we will give Ghanaians under an another administration. Okay. We didn't bus anybody. Okay. We didn't have to.
George, give me the assessment of an independent person staying out and watching what happened. First of all, what do you make of the delivery?
I thought it was a very interesting presentation, if I might say. I mean, again, judging from Bawumia's presentation over the years, and some would say that he's often been vindicated on some issues that he's spoken about. So definitely you want to pay particular attention in trying to get the other side of whatever those who are managing the economy have presented. If you look at issues about the state of our debt, our public debt, what has he got to say? The state of our economy, our fiscal issues, our expenditure. What is Bawumia's position on this particular issue? And therefore, I saw a very improved Bawumia in terms of his presentation skills, and he coming across as a very astute person and standing by whatever that he's putting out. I mean, there's this joke that we used to say with somebody who used to be on radio that person bars confidently. I mean, whether he's telling the truth or not, he appears very confident whatever he's putting out. And for me,
would you say he has transited quite seamlessly from the quiet banker that we knew him into the arena of the jabbing politics?
I would say that anytime I hear about me on air, I remember way back when he was at the Bank of Ghana and he was a deputy governor, and I tried to get an interview from him and he was running away. And for me, I asked myself, where did this gentleman pass?
And you have always had friends at the Bank of Ghana.
He's come out so improved. I mean, irrespective of which political party he's coming from, I saw a very improved person, his presentation skills and his being a very assertive person and all those things. As to whether everything that he's saying is the truth, we'll move it for another floor, for another debate altogether.
We will pick the issues one after another, and then we will deal with them and see whether they are borne by the facts on the ground, or this is just one more colored presentation done confidently for political gain.
But Malik, quick one. I mean, for me, watching the presentation, I saw more of an economic policy from the NPP side than any other thing. I wasn't interested in whether this government is doing right or wrong. I was not interested in critique of our debt situation, because we've always had issues with some of the figures that have been put out, and therefore every time some of these numbers are put out, you want to hold that with a pinch of salt and push further whether indeed the numbers that you're getting are the right numbers. But I was looking more of what an alternate government will present as in managing the economy. What will be your position on expenditure? What will be your policy stance on revenue, raising tax? And again, I saw from him or in his presentation that, well, more taxes or less taxes for businesses as they try to expand the tax net. So I was more interested in those alternate policies that he was putting out in terms of what an NPP government might do, or what an NPP government have or they has for the economy, and not about whether debt is this. I mean, we've always had issues with the numbers.
I'm hoping that Deputy Finance Minister Ato Forson will join us, and then we will put into him some of the issues raised. But before then, let's start with debt. And George was just talking about debt. Bawumia's argument is our debt to GDP ratio is 72%, not 63%, as put out by Finance Minister Setekpe when he delivered the midterm budget. Why do you think that is the case? Why do you think that the 72 is...
Let me restate what Dr. Bawumia said. That government has stated our debt to GDP ratio as 63%. The debt to GDP ratio, it's nothing you cannot understand. You take the debt, how much we are owing as a country, and then you take our GDP and then you divide. So there's always a question of which GDP you're taking. We all agreed on the debt, and at the close of May, it was 105 billion Ghana cedis. I'll make a comment on that. At the close of 2015, it was 100.2 billion Ghana cedis. Now, in calculating the debt to GDP ratio, government took the May 2016 debt stock. They took that one. At that time, the first quarter GDP figure was known. So if government wanted to be honest, they could have taken the first quarter GDP figure. So you divide your debt by that GDP figure, and it gives you a roughly more accurate representation of what our debt to GDP ratio ought to be. What government did was to take our debt as of May and then go and take what the debt is projected to be in December 2016 and then divide, because then the base is big, get a smaller figure. Dr. Bawumia made a point. At the time, the government was preparing to go to the capital market, and perhaps they needed to do some of these things in order to let our books look better than it really were. But let's face it, these investors, you cannot deceive them. It does not surprise me that we went and came back with nothing. We'll pay some attention to that. But in respect of the debt...
But today we didn't. Today we got the money we needed. So we didn't come back empty-handed.
I will come to that. What I'm saying is that in respect of the debt, it was not just the misrepresentation that Dr. Bawumia indicated. There's also the question of all that debt that we have incurred. You take 9.5 billion at the close of 2008, at the beginning of your administration. You are now running at 100, in fact 110 as of now. Dr. Bawumia used an earlier figure, I think 100.
Have you just calculated the 750 today?
The point I'm making, we've not even added that. The point I'm making, it will be higher if you added that. The point I'm making is that there ought to be proper accountability. We have to be told all that money that has been borrowed, what has it been put into? Let nobody mention infrastructure, because the figures are here, and we would see how little of that borrowing we have put into infrastructure as a country. The question we're asking is that, where is the money?
We are struggling to reach Mr. Atuforsen. George, again from an independent person's view, what's our debt stock?
It's a very difficult thing for a lot of us, because again, whether we have what it takes or the institutions that are there are giving us the numbers or not. Is it supposed to be coming from the Debt Management Department or the Ministry of Finance or the Bank of Ghana? When you go to the Bank of Ghana and you're pushing for these numbers, they are telling you to go to the Ministry of Finance, the Debt Department. So again, who do we trust here? So when you, from the figures from the Ministry of Finance, that's what you've seen, a little over 100 billion Ghana cedis. But again, when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, the finance ministry now says it's about 60-something. So we don't have independent institutions that are giving us these figures. And all these things will always happen. Because I ask myself, who has the mandate to release our debt numbers?
Is it about the Bank of Ghana?
I don't know, because the Bank of Ghana used to do that, based on figures given to it by the Ministry of Finance.
Because I remember that when Kofi Wampa was governor of the Bank of Ghana, that was before he took an early exit.
Yeah.
He consistently, at every monetary policy briefing,
announced that. And there have been instances where the figures that the Bank of Ghana gives out is different from what the Finance Ministry gives out. And there were issues about that one. But I'm saying that I think the Bank of Ghana should be doing that. Or maybe I stand to be educated. So if the Ministry of Finance is not releasing these numbers, then again, how can we do our own independent checks to verify these numbers that are being put out?
Why do you think the Bank of Ghana should be the one telling us what our debt is?
Because you see more as more of an independent institution. Because there have been instances when you speak to Dr. Joabe and he complains about the fact that he often has to go to institutions outside like the World Bank and the IMF to get an independent, data on the country about our debts, about other data. So it's unfortunate. So if the Ministry of Finance is now releasing these data, then again, where else
is
or
there
who can
a
we trust?
concern that...
Let me come in here. I recognize and respect the point he's making, that sometimes there's difficulty with data and there are discrepancies that have to be reconciled. But on this occasion, that is not what we're dealing with. We are all clear in our mind. There's unanimity on this. The Bank of Ghana, the Ministry of Finance, those of us even in opposition, we are agreed that Ghana's debt at the close of May 2016 was 105 billion. Nobody has contested.
I think that we are looking at the debt to GDP ratio.
Now the GDP.
Yeah.
We are also not in any disagreement. We are clear what the GDP is. At the close of 2015, it was 139 billion Ghana cedis. If you want to do an honest calculation of debt to GDP ratio, you take the GDP at the close of 2015, you go and take the debt at the close of 2015. Government did that accurately and got about 72% of GDP at the close of 2015. It was when it came to May.
May 2016.
2016. Then they took the debt as of May, 105 billion, correctly. That was a correct figure. Instead of taking GDP as of May, and we had that of the first quarter, so they could have used it. Then they went and took what would be at the close of the year. So it's not a matter of...
But how can we independently verify that? Because again...
No, but that figure is out by
the economy indeed expanded marginally in the first quarter. We are right on that one. According to figures by
the GDP figure, don't even bother yourself. The Ghana Statistical Service, if you go to their website now, the GDP figure for the first quarter is known. the GDP, so they do it quarterly. So you won't know for May. The closest you can get is for March. If government was minded to do the right thing.
First quarter.
Exactly. The question is, why did government choose to use GDP,
a projected GDP
at the close of December? And I think, with respect, that this was cunningly done to let the figure look small.
And why are we even quibbling?
If there's any controversy,
why are we quibbling over this?
I even think we shouldn't. It is just to make the point that unless we are honest with economic management, we're going to run into these difficulties. You see, if your debt is 105, the way it hurts you is that you go to your interest payments. Because what debt does to you is that you have to use so much money to service it. So money that should have been used to buy chalk and should have been used to buy crude to ensure that there's no doom, so is put into interest payment. So whether government wants to call it 63% or 66%, whatever GDP they want to use, they can do that. But in the end, the consequences would come back to you.
Let me come, George, explain to my brother Erasum in Wa or Hakim in Sandima what we mean when we talk about debt to GDP ratio. Why is it important?
I'll try my best.
Why is it important?
I think that we are looking at your ability. I mean, if you have too much debt on your table, the ability to quickly turn those debts around, if you're going for a new money and you have too much debt on your table, the concern here is that, Malik, how can you turn around those debts that you have already to pay me back on time? So we are looking at a situation where if your economy is big, your economy is expanding, then it will generate resources for you to pay that money back on time. If your debt is shooting at a level that your economy is not expanding, there isn't much economic activities, then there are questions about your ability to pay back that money on time and the impact on servicing those loans. So if your economy is contracting, the argument here is that you might not be able to pay those debts to me on time.
So let's deal with interest payment, which is one of the major
plans. And that's when you go through the supplementary budget. It's a very, very serious issue because you look at a situation where it has moved up as one of the most big items on government expenditure compared to capital expenditure.
You're talking about interest payment.
Interest payment.
So this is money
if I am right, I mean about it 12 billion or even more than that. In terms of
this year, I think it's 10.5 billion. Yeah. That's interest payment
so
for this year.
So these are just interest that money that you have setting aside to pay as just interest on funds that you've borrowed.
Not the principal amount.
I stand to be corrected on that, but these are just interest.
No, they're just the interest.
These are just interest.
The servicing and the things you pay around it. If you want to pay back, we call it amortization. That is when you're really paying back.
Yeah.
Interest payment. And when as a country, your interest payment is the second largest expenditure after wages, how can your economy grow? And we can't see this and say that we're in trouble and we need to change course. And we continue to say that we are laying a billion foundation.
But what about the argument and that the government makes that they are borrowing at a very cheap rate, the new borrowings that you're doing? So in normal banking, they'll say refinancing, taking maybe some cheap funds to finance an expensive one. What about that one? I mean, going for this fresh Eurobond that they raised, the argument is that they are paying down their $750 million.
Yes,
they're using it
because they got it at 9.2.
The 2007 bond that was issued, which will mature next year. If you pay that one, wouldn't the debts come down? If you're using a 9.25 compared to a 10.75 or so, there's some...
yes, because the last Eurobond we took before today...
Yes, we are beginning to see this as a normal way of life in our governance, and I think it is most dangerous.
What's the option?
I'm coming. Yeah. The simple point. You see, the domestic market, you go there to deal with liquidity issues, that you're expecting revenue from some source. It is not going to come as quickly as you need it. You go to the domestic capital market, you borrow short-term, 3 months, in the treasury bills and those things. And then when the money comes, you go and pay it back. So for those short-term instruments, you do that to manage liquidity, you know. Now, what we have been doing is that we borrow domestically to finance our budget and to finance the everyday things. And then when it is time to repay them, because it's just 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year, when it is time to repay them, then we say that, no, we don't have the money to repay. Then we now go and do proper borrowing on the international market.
Take a Eurobond.
Then we go and use it to settle the old debt. How can you live like that? That you are taking Eurobond, you go and tell investors, that give me this money, I'm going to invest it in infrastructure so that it would yield and I'll pay you back.
Which is what the finance minister described as smart borrow.
And then we come back and how can you live a life, even as an individual, that you borrow, and when your friends are pressurizing you, you now go and borrow from the bank to pay your friends. And you are not asking yourself, why am I always having to borrow to survive? We can't ask that question and answer honestly. So there's no relief in this, what is now becoming normal, that anytime we are going into the international capital market, we say we are going to borrow, not to invest, but we are going to borrow to pay yesterday's debt that we cannot pay.
And part of that debt was created by your government with the 2007 Eurobond. And Setepe has consistently spoken about the last Eurobond that was taken. And even this one, part of that money was supposed to be used to offset the 2007
That's not a problem. Let's not create the impression that this is something about MPP and DC.
No, I'm just setting the record straight.
Because if we borrow $750 million US
in 2007,
the government itself has a testimony on how that 750 was used. It was invested in energy. It was the government's own testimony. I can read it to you. Now, the government that left you that 750, which a part of which was even spent by this administration.
Yes, I remember.
Also discovered oil that has now yielded 3.2 billion. And we can use part of that oil money to offset. Let's even grant that because that 750 is sitting in Ghana's book as in some NPP colors. Let's assume. You cannot use the 3.2 billion at the close of 2015. You cannot use that money to offset that. And you are now going to have to borrow. And then you come back and you say, and that's 750. Anytime we have gone to the capital market, that is the excuse. We are using it to resettle It is also because we mix economic management with propaganda. If only in the midst of all this, we can let it look like it is not our fault and therefore Ghanaians should continue voting for us and it is somebody else's fault, then we are fine. But that shouldn't be. We should fix our economy because we need to do that for future generations.
George, the last Eurobond that was taken...
Quick one, I want one quick clarification that the 2007 Eurobond, we borrowed those funds to invest in some infrastructure projects.
Yes,
and obviously they were supposed to pay back for itself. What happened to those funds? I'm just asking. So if it's supposed to go into railway and other projects, and the plan is that when you invest these funds in infrastructure projects, they are supposed to generate funds to pay. If it's construction of a road, maybe Accra to Kumasi, you tow that road, or then when the money is coming, you put in an extra account or you put in a separate account, then they are going to pay back for themselves.
So I remember out of that 750, 200 million of it was invested locally. And I remember that somewhere in 2010 or so, the government picked...
No, Malik, what I'm saying is that if these funds are invested into projects, the arrangement is that when the proceeds come or the returns come, they go into a separate account to pay back.
I agree perfectly with you. And Setepe has often cited the gas project at Tuabo.
But that was a fresh
I agree. I'm just saying that. I'm just adding up to your point.
But I'm just saying that it's all about just like prudent management, and we are all hoping that this might not be the last time government will be going on to the international market. If indeed we are borrowing to invest in infrastructure projects, the laid down arrangement is that there's supposed to be a separate account that when the money is coming, if you're constructing a new gas infrastructure project, you're supposed to sell these gas.
The question I was coming to ask you, George, what happens? Is the last Eurobond that was taken, if I remember correctly, finance minister said that part of that money was going to use to offset a part of the 2007 Eurobond. Did that happen to the best of your
As far as I'm concerned, yeah, that is what we got from the ministry. As to the reality, whether that happened, again...
No, but that's the point I was trying to make to you, that now, the position you're taking is a good one, that you borrow to do infrastructural investment. It might not necessarily be a specific project that pays itself. In fact, if you look at
social projects?
No, it may well be investing it in your electricity infrastructure. That might not pay back immediately, but it is supposed to enhance your capacity to deliver power for your industries, so those investments may well be legitimate. What I'm saying is that this government has moved away from that simple wisdom and has now accepted that we go to the capital market to borrow, to come and pay the domestic debt that we took. The government is not denying, and the government is not telling us that I'm borrowing to do capital infrastructure, and then they put the money. They come to Parliament and tell us that this money I'm going to borrow, I'm not putting it in infrastructure, I'm using it to pay the old debts. And the point I'm concluding on this is that the next time government comes to Parliament, we should refuse them. If I remember the last one, the minority voted against the Eurobond, and then we were told that...
The one that was taken
exactly,
and didn't
and then,
work.
Then later on. So perhaps we should all learn from this, that we cannot continue borrowing to pay back old debts. It is a culture that must stop. If we would stop the waste and the corruption, I have no doubt in my mind that some of these borrowings might not be necessary. We need to deal with this upfront.
But Malik, sorry, I mean, Honorable Kwekwe Ting is in Parliament. And again, the argument here, isn't it an indictment of members of Parliament?
I have no difficulty. It is an indictment of Parliament.
Showing that when the finance minister comes to Parliament and say, honorable members, allow me to spend X.
But George, it's not about the arrangements that we have.
It's not about the status quo. It's about moving forward, because at the end of the day, Malik, if these funds are not invested in prudent projects, you and I are going to pay for it.
I agree.
It's an indictment on Parliament. On that one, I agree with you. But I just told you that, yes, I'm a member of Parliament. I spoke against it at the committee level. I spoke against it at the plenary. I voted against it the first day. The second day, government mobilized ministers and people who had traveled were all instructed to come. They came. And now it was overturned, and yes, I'm a member of Parliament, and I'm embarrassed.
Which is why,
what is it that I can do?
Which is how Parliament has always operated, by the way.
The majority will have their...
Yeah, the
minority will have their say, the majority will have their way.
You don't turn to me and to say it's not an indictment on Parliament. Of course it is.
So, George, when you hear that for this year, out of 6 ministries, allocations for 6 important ministries, 3 trade and industry, roads and highways, food and agriculture, 6 important ministries, that all of these water, resources, works and housing, youth and sports, Ministry of Transport, all of these, the allocation to them is 2.1 billion. Mm-hmm. When our interest payment is 10.5 billion, which is how many folds? About 5 times the allocation to 6 important ministries. Our interest payment is 10.5 billion, allocation to 6 important ministries, 2.1 billion. As somebody who sits back and looks at the figures, how does that...
I think it's worrying, because again, we claim, or we say, or the World Bank is now saying that we are lower middle income country or a higher middle income country. And it comes to its own challenges, because those cheap funds you are getting from IMF and World Bank and the Danida and all those things, they are no longer coming. So that's another thing altogether. Again, you would want to blame at the upper end those who are managing the economy. But again, you also have to understand that when your member of Parliament, your minister comes in and says that we are borrowing X amount of money, we are doing this road project, at the end of the day, that money was a borrowed funds and it has to be paid for. So if these funds are not going into it, yes, I appreciate the social good thing, that it's not every fund that you go out there and borrow that you can pay for it. Some is about improving the infrastructure. How can you even
like extending electricity to villages where the people cannot pay.
Moving away from whether it is schools under trees or under tree schools or whatever.
They absolutely need these facilities. And ensure
that you can attract the required teachers. If they ask you to go and teach somewhere in Tamale, you would go because the infrastructure there is good. I appreciate that one. But the time has come for us to ensure, civil society, you and I, that make sure that when government goes out to borrow, these monies are used for what they're supposed to be used for.
But you see, that's a difficulty. Governments have a responsibility to provide social goods for even the underprivileged who can't pay for these social goods. But Malik,
if you go through the supplementary budget and you see interest payments alone as over 10 billion, that's worrying. Whichever way you want to look at it, the arguments can be made for and against, and the fact that, yes, the economy slowed down, it's not expanding, and projected revenue wasn't coming in as expected. Commodity prices were declining, and therefore those revenues were not coming in. Yes, we do agree. But I'm saying that you would always be worried that enough funds are not being directed into projects. There's serious traffic in town. I don't know what is causing that. But if our road networks are good, If the traffic lights are working, you don't have to leave the house at 4 a.m. and leave the office at 10 a.m. When do you get to the house to rest and even come back tomorrow more refreshed?
Look, it is important that just to further the point you made. Sometimes I get uncomfortable. You see, our economy has always had problems. I'm not referring to you. It's a point that has been made outside. Our economy has always had some difficulties. But it is important to point out that things are really getting worse. You see, this interest payments, it is a feature that has been with our budget. And many other countries, you look at the budget statements, there are some interest payments. Just look at the statistics. In the last 10 years, in 2006, it was 400 billion. And then 2007, 440. 2008, 680. 2009, it jumped to 1 billion. And then we went to 1.4, 1.6, 2.4, 4.3, 7.08, now 9 billion. Even though you would see the figures that we've always had this interest, it is really getting worse. And it is so for not just this indicator. You go to debt to GDP, you would see that yes, we always had debt to GDP, but now the debt to GDP ratio is getting worse. And now that the base will not change again because we've already used the biggest base, any debt that comes, the debt to GDP ratio just rises. I am making the point that let's not allow the wrong strategies that are informing the deterioration in the performance of our economy be drowned in general statements about we need to do this, we need to do that. There are specific policy interventions that have to change. And if this government will not change, a future government will have to change it. Otherwise, things will continue to get worse and worse.
We are paying interest payments at this point. When do we pay the actual loans? When do we do amortization? And
alongside we do some amortization. You remember recently there was this debate when Dr. Bawumia did put out that we had borrowed some 37 billion US dollars. Today the figure rose, of course, because of the time. And government came and said, oh,
it's 26.
It's 20. It is because partly we pay some of our debt, but also because you use the wrong interest rates. If you take loans in the past and you're converting to the dollar and you use today's dollar rates, you're definitely going to have that kind of. So yes, we have been paying some of our debt, and we call that amortization. But if we were paying as fast as we are accumulating, we should not be rising. In the last, you inherit a debt stock.
Are we rising? Because
no, I'm saying, no, let me put out this figure. 9.5 at the beginning of the NDC administration, of this government's administration. We now hit just a period of over 8 years. We now hit even 105. And
we have modern hospitals and modern roads and modern schools to show for this.
I have here. But please, no, these statements are important because government has been going.
We have to take a break. When we come back,
I would respond to this infrastructure point.
But Malik, quick one. I think that also as we talk about these interest payments, another critical thing is about the management of our local currency, the Ghana cedi. If the Ghana cedi remains strong, we could see a decline in these interest payments.
Okay, so when we come back, you will expand on that point. You are watching PM Express, and we are talking about the issues raised by Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, the vice presidential candidate of the NPP, at a campaign launch disguised as a lecture earlier today. Stay tuned. Yeah, welcome back. We are discussing Dr. Bawumia's diagnosis and prognosis and attacks on the economic record of President John Dramani Mahama and the NDC in the last 8 years. We're hoping to have Deputy Finance Minister Atu Forson join us to do the discussion. But earlier he agreed that he would join the discussion on condition that he has read the document of Dr. Bawumia's presentation. At this point, he hasn't read it fully, so he's constrained in contributing. In the meantime, I have two gentlemen in the studio, a politician and a journalist. I believe that they are sufficiently equipped to deal with these matters. Before we went on the break, you were going to respond to my suggestion that, look, we have we have massive infrastructural development to show for all the borrowing. There are modern hospitals all over the place. There are roads being constructed. There are schools being constructed all over the place. So the money is well spent.
Yes, it is always possible to, let me use this simple analogy. You send somebody to the market with, say, 200 Ghana cedis. The person comes with some tomatoes, with some onions and some salt, and you complain that 200 Ghana cedis, and is that all I could get? And the person says, can't you see? Then the person takes a picture of the tomatoes and the onions and is telling you that this is your money. The question we ought to be asking is, how much money have come into your hands? And how much of it have you put into infrastructure? Fortunately, in government's own budget statements, they tell us what the capital expenditure is. All the schools and the roads.
And by capital expenditure, you are talking about money spent on projects such as
roads, infrastructure.
Yes,
government tells us. Now, let me give some statistics. In 2014, for instance, if you look at net borrowing.
That's the amount of money we borrow.
Yeah, I'm netting it off against that which we have paid off, because I'm just taking the debt levels and subtracting. Net borrowing in 2014 was 27.5 billion.
That's how much
in 20
net terms.
Now we put 6 billion in infrastructure. Government's own report.
27 minus 6.
Yes.
So that's
and that is 22%. In 2015 is slightly better. We took net borrowing 20.6. And how much did we put into capital expenditure? 7.1. That's about 34%. And you know what government has been doing is to go around and use a camera to capture these 22% roads, so that when even president is coming to parliament, they show those roads to us and give some impression that never mind how much money has come into our hands, accept these pictures you are seeing as a record in infrastructure. Now, every discussion of government is infrastructure. But, Malik, in order that we would situate this in the circumstances of ordinary Ghanaians, these are not just some economic figures we are throwing about. You see, when government, for instance, borrows so much, and government has to use so much money to pay the interest, the question you ask yourself is, where is government going to find the money to do the things that you need, the schools that you need? The money, now I go to the constituency, I visit primary schools, and they tell me that the little money that must come for buying chalk isn't available.
Oh, that was some years back. It's no longer
I'm
the
saying
case.
that now. Now, just last week I was in the constituency. And are you surprised? Go around. Little things. The reason recently we've been sleeping in darkness is that buying crude, and we're owing all over the place. When companies...
Dumso no longer obtains. Dumso has been fixed.
But Malik, sorry just to...
The simple point I'm making is that the things we discuss, and they sound big, interest payment and all that, their impact on the ordinary person is that life is tougher. And today when you get to the market, you get to the streets, and they tell you that things are tough, and it reflects in the government's growth figures because economic activities are not expanding.
The market women always say that anyway. Every year, the preceding year is always better.
But concluding on this, the market women may always say, as you're saying, but government itself is telling us that economic activity is slowing down. Isn't it true? Government's own report says that the economy that expanded by 9.1% in 2008, economic activities expanding by 14% in 2011 when oil came on stream, is now expanding at 3.9%. That is not market women saying times are hard. Government itself is telling us that things aren't going well. Of course, it is the reason we will go to the IMF and say, come and bail us out. Look, until government comes to the understanding, honest understanding, that the way the economy has been managed in the last 8 years of the NDC administration would only bring hardship and nothing else. And government must commit to make changes, radical changes.
I'm just asking, you're talking about where are all these funds going to? Maybe, Honorable, should the NDC government look at another HIPIC benefit when they put up the infrastructure
and then tag all of them?
The HIPIC benefit on it, maybe then we can see where these funds are going.
But when I ask where the funds are going, I understand the joke. When I ask where, I would have been happier if government's budget statement, for instance, after borrowing 27.5 billion, they could report that, say, 25 billion of it was used to provide infrastructure. And government would go and write against those projects. That this is at least the money we borrow from here. I would be comfortable. The worry is that there's even nothing to write. If after, I'm concluding on this, if after the NPP administration had subscribed to the HIPIC initiative, if the HIPIC benefits had disappeared, the way we are not seeing the borrowed money now, there would not even have been those things to label HIPIC benefits.
How do you respond to those who say the highest GDP achieved by the NPP government in 2008 was
9.1 now, revised to 9.1.
Yeah, I think it was revised. I didn't know it was
granted.
Yeah, 9.1.
Because the figure we're given at the time was 8.4, 9.1.
Before rebasing.
The highest achieved by an NDC government was in 2011, which was 15 point something. So they still have a better record than you do.
It's not a business about records. One, that is false records. Let me give you the actual figures. You're talking about non-oil GDP. If you want to compare non-oil GDP, you compare. The 9.1 you mentioned is non-oil GDP. We know the non-oil GDP for the 2011. In 2011, let me give you the figure. Non-oil GDP was 8.2.
But why are we taking out oil?
It is because oil you discover, contractors come to drill, they export. So you want to be sure, and that's why we speak of the resource case. You want to be sure that, but for this God-given gift, that is not coming from economic policy management, but for this, what will be, it's not for nothing that government itself reports non-oil GDP. So this 14% you're talking about happened in 2011 when oil came on stream. But let's even grant it to those who say so, that yes, it was 14.0% in 2011. It is not so much about what it was then. What is it now? From 14.0, in 2012, we dropped to 9.3. In 2013, we dropped further to 7.3, below the levels when we did not have oil.
In 2014, 6 points.
In 2014, no, 4%. In 2014, go and look at the revised figures by Ghana Statistical Service. In 2015, 3.9%. And Malik, you think what as a country we should be discussing? I'm concluding on it. What as a country we should be discussing in respect of these figures is not the reasons why we are dropping. We should rather be saying, oh, in 2011 we got 14%. So never mind if things are getting worse, we are happy. Is that how we should analyze?
Let me read a few comments from some of our viewers. Good evening, Mr. Abbas. Listening to Bawumia's analysis this afternoon, clearly he has given me and many Ghanaians hope in future because he is our next vice president. Mahama has mismanaged the Ghanaian economy. Mahama is arrogant. Let's vote the dead goat out. This is Michael Nyami Sefi. And then this one. I can give you, Malik, I'm a teacher in Nkoko. Trust me, for the past year and a half, chalks and basic items like teacher's notebook and registers are not coming. I can give you more information if you want. This is Sami Setre. Mr. MP. There's a lot. Malik, later Alhaji Ali Mama held not a single lecture on the economy, distorting facts as Bawumia always does. Yet, he won 2 electoral victories with President Kufuor. This is the 3rd lecture by Bawumia, but has not resulted in a single victory for Akufo-Addo. While President Mahama is seriously canvassing for votes in the central region with his vice doing same in the Upper East, the NPP is interested in doing the same things, yet expect different expect different results. I pray they don't head to the Supreme Court again in 2017. God help Ghana. This is Barima Kubaji, a friend of the show who always sends. Malik, be told that if at the micro level loans are obtained to meet consumption expenditure, there is absolutely no economic sense or justification. At the macro level, if borrowing are made to augment investable infrastructure, no qualms about that. However, borrowing to service old debts is an act of incompetence and mismanagement. Kwesi Evans, Man Kesim. There's so many of messages that we have received. We don't have too much time. Let's deal with some of the other political arguments that Bawumia made about comparing even Mills's administration to Mahama's administration. His claim is that the 66% of the total debt, of Ghana's total debt, was brought on by Mahama's administration. Do the figures support that, George? Do we have the figures to support this claim that 66% of our total debt was brought?
I think that still we have to do some little state proof here to establish some of these numbers that Doc is putting out. So for me, we have to do that. But again, just a quick one. I also want to ask an honourable some questions about some of the policies that Bawumia put out, and the fact that
if I can quickly respond to his point, then I'm ready for that. First, Dr. Bawumia did not set out to compare even the Kufuor administration and the Mills administration, the Mama. What he did,
doing that.
Yes, what he did was trend analysis to see how things have been changing, and it is the facts that brought out that observation that things have been particularly bad under the NDC 8 years, but it has been particularly bad under the Mama administration.
Is that not because he's the one you are trying to take power from in this election?
If Dr. Bawumia had just made this point, then the question you asked would be legitimate. But when he puts figures there and he's showing you the trend and pointing to evidence that this is the trend and it's particularly bad under this administration, you're not in a position to say it is because you are contesting. So the simple point that comes out of all this is, as a people, do we want to have more of this? What Ghana has been going through recently, the deterioration in all important economic indicators, and that is backed by people in the street saying times are tough. Now, as Ghanaians, is government going to change course? Is government going to change policy and the way they do things? And if they are not going to change, as a country, we want to continue having more of this. It's a question we have to ask.
Let me go to George and speak about the depreciation of the cedi. Dr. Bawumia spoke at length about the depreciation of the cedi and how that has contributed to where we are now. And you were talking about it and its role in our debt servicing.
You're right on that one. And again, most of these funds, if you look at the share of the foreign debt and the local debt, I think a chunk of them, I haven't seen the latest numbers, but excuse me on that, but the previous ones I saw, a chunk of our debt were foreign debt. So if you go and borrow,
it's changing.
It's changing. It's not doing that local now. Sorry. Thank you so much for that correction. But the plan is that.
What did you say? That the chunk of it is foreign.
Foreign debt.
Yes.
Okay,
that's accurate. And it's getting even worse because we are now borrowing outside.
I'm saying that you go out and borrow these funds. Now, your local currency is the Ghana cedi. So when it comes to servicing these debts, if you go and take $1 and maybe 5 cedis is to $1, these are the scenarios here. At the time of borrowing that money, and it was maybe 4 Ghana cedis to $1, and the time of trying to service it is maybe 5 Ghana cedis to $1. It means you have to go out there and look for more Ghana cedis.
So the debt would have become the money would have become more expensive now because you need more Ghana cedis.
Ghana cedis to pay that $1 that you're paying. So if the economy is not being managed in a way or things are not going well for your local currency to be strong, you see that you're not just only looking at servicing that debt quickly, but you also have a challenge of getting more money to pay for that
but
same $1.
This year, I think the city has
been fairly stable, and that is
compared
good.
to 2014.
Because of what? Because of what?
Is it demand issue? Is it a demand-driven issue?
Is it that now
Or
we have been able to expand our exports, and therefore we're getting more foreign exchange? You see, it's important. The reason the city has stabilized is that, one, the IMF came in. The IMF itself brought some balance of payment support. They brought in some foreign exchange.
Which is really pittance, isn't it?
No, but that the IMF is here.
Policy credibility.
Yes,
look at that.
That IMF is here. That you yourself, you do not have credibility. So the IMF is here to give you a little of that. And that the cocoa syndicated loan and the Eurobond we are borrowing, they are all in foreign exchange. So they come, and then it would give a certain stability to our economy. The question we should ask is, when it is time to repay these loans? When it is time, and sometimes when I remember that, yes, this government will go, I worry somewhat for the new administration, because when all these debts we are accumulating, plenty, somebody will have to repay, and will have to repay in forex. At that point, if you don't get good economic managers, the way the city will drop, you cannot help it, because the current stability is not being sustained by any output. It's being sustained by borrowing.
But quick one. I mean, another thing that has been addressed, whoever might have to take the credit for that, is dealing with the panic buying as well. I don't know where that is coming from. The situations where in previous years, people were just holding dollars because of the fear that things are going to get worse.
They won't do that now.
If it has to do with any correction at the money,
I think there's enough.
I'm asking a question.
I know, it's a good question.
So can that be attributed to whoever is managing that space?
That quickly.
That someone like Malik is not rushing out there to hold dollars when you don't need it.
No, that thing will come. You see, once there's some stability and the speculators are not sure that what if I go and buy and I'm not able to sell at a better rate, as soon as you now have to go and pay your foreign debts, and therefore your city begins to fall, that is when the speculators will jump in again.
I think that, given what happened today, the Eurobond was flown in London today.
Was it closed in London? Yeah.
Yeah, it was closed in London. We had $750 million
dollars,
and at the rate of 9.2%.
If my calculations are right, that's almost around $70 million every year, if I'm right.
Okay.
I stand to be corrected, but
does that mean that
$9.270 million every year?
Does that signal renewed confidence in our economy? Because the last Eurobond that we took last year, was it last year or early this year? It was with the sovereign guarantee from the IMF, and yet we got it at 10.75. If now we don't have such a guarantee, and we are getting it at 9.2,
lower horizon, and all that would come.
Of course, the first one was 50 years.
It's a yes and no thing, because a lot of things have played into that. You would just not want to look at the fact that anytime there's an oversubscription, that necessarily translates into confidence.
You need to look at the rates as well.
But what rates are you offering to you? If, Malik, I tell you that I'm going to pay you an interest of maybe 20% compared to an interest rate in the market of 5%, you come in. But again, you are looking at a situation where you thought things were that bad, and therefore the bids will not be high. So it's a yes or no thing. It's not a one answer.
Does it matter that this is 5 years? Does it matter that this one is 5 years, the other one was 15 years?
It does, and my own worry is that we are now going to have to repay this in 5 years. As a Ghanaian, as a policy person, what I'm thinking is, so in 5 years, the money to repay, where is it going to come from?
We will find it.
But we'll find it. But if I can conclude on this, the broad point that was also made in conclusion, in conclusion, is that this government excessive borrowing, excessive taxation of the private sector, competing with the private sector for credit from the local banks, is making it difficult for our companies to try expand and create jobs. It is something we will reverse when we get the opportunity. That's one of the major planks of the MPP's arguments. My guests have been Kuku Kwati. He's a member of parliament for Obuasi West. He's member of Ghana's Finance Committee of Parliament. And then Joy Wafi. Joy Wafi is an editor with Joy Business, my colleague at Joy FM.
My name is Malik Abbas Dabu. God willing, tomorrow we will bring you another exciting edition of PM Express. Until then, bye-bye.